Hello everyone, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis. Welcome to today's video. Today it's going to be a quick hobby discussion video, I suppose is a good way of looking at it. We're going to be talking about start collecting, which if you recall I made a video on at Christmas when they were actually debuted. Because start collecting for me was a great idea that also had a few risks associated with it, and I want to come back to that discussion and just highlight what start collecting has done well. So, what is start collecting for those who maybe don't know? Start collecting was a series of boxes that debuted in Christmas 2015, containing a series of kits for various 40k and Age of Sigmar armies. It was a £50 or your regional equivalent box containing a leader unit, a troop unit, and a big thing, which was a vehicle, monster, heavy infantry, whatever it's happened to be. Sometimes these kind of got mixed up, so you had the monster and the leader at the same time. For example, maybe Fire Slayers, Xeraphon, in which case you got a medium-sized unit, such as cavalry, in order to compensate for that. And the general value of that box, if you bought all the kits separately, was in the region of about £80 or your regional equivalent. It may vary actually depending on the value of the bundle compared to the value of the boxes, but it does vary from kit to kit, so I wouldn't just judge that as a round number. As I said, there were 4 boxes for each side. There was Marines, Tau, Skitari, and Guard, I believe, although I'm willing to be corrected. There may have been a Demons box, actually, and there was Seraphon, Slaves to Darkness, Greenskins, and Malignants, I believe, on the Age of Sigmar side. Willing to be corrected on that, of course. My concern at the time was that start collecting was going to be a limited time gimmick for Christmas only, as in they were only going to be available in the run-up and maybe the immediate period after Christmas. We saw this before with the Army box set, so you could buy a Space Marine army for, I can't remember exactly how much it was, £100 to £150, and that would get you a huge amount of stuff, but you had it on a very limited time offer, and then it was gone, and then something else was around in the next year, which usually Space Marines and some other army that got some attention, and then Empire and some other army that got some attention during the year. It did vary, but that was the basic plan, and I was worried that start collecting was going to go the same way. Not every army was going to get one. The other risk was that certain factions were going to be ignored because of start collecting, particularly the older 40k factions and the unredone AOS factions. The greater concern, of course, came for Age of Sigmar, with certain factions not actually existing yet, but for 40k the concern was that factions who maybe had had their codex before start collecting and weren't in line for any new releases in the future were going to get nothing. They were not going to get start collecting, and players would not be tempted to go and collect those armies. And for Age of Sigmar, considering the fact that the factions were still being released in bits, it was almost impossible to know when a faction was going to get a start collecting, and with Order and Chaos being practically the only releases at that time, I was worried that Destruction and Death were going to be completely left behind. Thankfully, everything I've just said is a lie. Start collecting has proved me wrong, put my concerns to bed, and I'm happy for it. Because we've seen GW has taken those problems and dealt with them. So almost all, if not all, factions have received a start collecting either on release or soon after. The only one that I can think of immediately is Beastclaw Raiders, the brand new Ogre faction, but they have received a special box anyway, the Icewind Assault, or some other majig, whatever it's called. Some factions have actually received start collecting without a release. For example, Orcs, Eldar, Khorne Bloodbound, and Stormcast Eternals. They have backtracked on previous releases and given them start collecting boxes, which is very, very welcome. The Orc one contained a Pain Boy, which is a pretty new miniature, a Death Dread, and some boys. The Eldar one, I believe, contained 3 jetbikes, a Falcon, and a jetbike Farseer. Bloodbound and Stormcast, you can go and look them all up on Games Workshop's website, just search start collecting, and they're all there. The problem, though, is that faction releases for AOS have made any backdated releases actually impossible because those factions don't exist. And it does mean that if the AOS release schedule is at any time slow, it's not going to help because there'll be no new stuff coming out and therefore no new start collecting is coming out. That won't be a problem because shiny new stuff is a thing and every faction that has come out has got to start collecting, I think. I think the only one that maybe No, Pestilence does. Yeah, I think every faction has a start collecting in Age of Sigmar. And with 40k, every faction is going to get redone. So, for example, armies like Chaos Space Marines will eventually get one too. But depends on when their armies get redone and when their start collecting rolls around if they don't have a redo. So there are still some risks associated with it, but in terms of my initial concerns about start collecting, they have been dealt with. And obviously, the fact that I'm talking about this in August and it was released in December means that they're still around. They're not a one off Christmas gimmick, they're still going and have been updated constantly. Pretty much every time a faction comes out, as I've said, they've got to start collecting, which is very, very good. Now, that's all well and good. That's the concerns I had addressed. But what makes start collecting so good? Because we used to have battle forces and battalions for 40k and fantasy respectively. These gave you a nice little core to an army, they're a good way to expand or to start a force. And start collecting tries to do the same thing. But in my opinion, start collecting does it better. So let's start looking at the value proposition. The price is at the very least a third off. Like if you pay £75 for those kits, you get it at 33% off. With the average price being around 80, that's a better than a third saving. And I know it doesn't get this extreme at the moment, but you're heading towards 40, 45, 50% in some cases, which is very, very good if you're trying to build a force quickly. The other upside, and this particularly applies to Age of Sigmar, but I'll talk about that in a moment, is that a lot of key units for armies are included. You get troops, you get leaders, and you get a usually pretty powerful vehicle monster thingamajig. And that includes many multi-variant kits that make lots of different things. So I'm going to use Flesh Eater Courts from Age of Sigmar as an example. With the exception of one unit, you can build an entire Flesh Eater Courts army out of just start collectings. You can build all the combinations of Ghoul Kings, which is Zombie Dragon mounted, Zombie Dragon unmounted, Terrorgeist mounted, Terrorgeist unmounted, and on foot. You would need 4 boxes to do it, but you can make all of the combinations of leaders just out of start collecting. You can get, at the same time, that gives you 100 Crypt Ghouls and 15 Crypt Horrors that can also be made as Crypt Flayers, can be made as Varkheists if you're going for something different and you want to make a Vampire Lord out of it and just have the Ghouls as painting practice. And you also can make the Courtiers at the same time for the Crypt Haunters and Crypt Horrors respectively. The only unit that's not in that box is the Varkulf. The Varkulf Courtiers, the only unit you can't build out of start collecting, which means that if you're trying to build a Flesh Eater Courts army, you can do it rapidly, very, very rapidly. And because I did the maths, I went and looked it up. Flesh Eater Courts is about £90 for the units in the box, so it's a net saving of probably 40%, nearly. Actually, it's over 40% because 10% of 90 is 9, 40% is 36, and 36 away is 54. So it's a better than 40% saving on building your army, and then you just buy 1 or 2 Varkulf and you're done. Which is ridiculous, considering, let's say, you buy 5 start collectings, and you get a 40% saving, so 60% is 250. Let me just do that maths for a moment. That's 42. It's about £420 you would have been spending. Actually, no, am I right? Am I right? 90 times 450. Yeah, 450 nearly that you'd be spending. It's ridiculous good value, particularly as you start building up a large army. And in Age of Sigmar, considering a lot of the factions are very compartmentalized with lots of little units in the faction, not a lot of unit variety, just lots of units made up of one box, it's amazing value. And the other thing is it doesn't just apply to gamers. So gamers can start or expand an army very, very easily and can get WYSIWYG without using magnets if they buy 2 or 3 boxes, which in most cases you are going to do. So for example, if you are a Space Marine player, you buy 3 start collectings, you get 3 commanders, you can customize how you wish, 3 tactical squads to customize how you wish, and 3 dreadnoughts to have various options for war gear, meaning you don't have to chop and change arms and keep track of things, which, as I can say from my old Death Dread, is a pain in the butt. You don't have to do it because you can get WYSIWYG because you get a lot of boxes. And you're generally, I think you're getting the captain for free in that box, but you're generally getting free stuff that's WYSIWYG for you. Great. Painters. You get test models. For example, if you're building an army and there's certain units you maybe have too much of, or surplus to requirements, or that you just don't like, you can use them for painting practice. So for example, there's a colour scheme you want to try and you want to do a certain scheme, but you don't want to use one of your friends' fancy models for it, never mind, you've got some spares, just test on them. This will also allow you to create some different colour variety options, which is also a lot of fun. And collectors, well, if gamers want it for WYSIWYG, then collectors get it for completionism. You get multiple variants of the same thing for a lot cheaper than you could otherwise, which is fantastic. Generally, everybody in the hobby has something to gain from start collecting. Collectors, painters, gamers in particular, but it applies across the entire pantheon. We all stand to gain from start collecting, and I am so glad to see that Games Workshop is running with this. I can't wait to see what other armies get done, how they get treated. It'd be interesting if we got a Death Watch start collecting, which actually is possibly not impossible, which would be a heck of a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to the future. I think the future for Games Workshop as a business model, and for the business model in terms of getting people into the hobby, and for hobbyists, is really going the right way. I'm very, very pleased that start collecting is sticking around. Of course, this is just my opinion on the topic. If you want to chip in with your thoughts on start collecting, do let me know in the comments below. And as a hobbyist, if you were trying to make the hobby more accessible or make it a little bit cheaper to get going, how would you do it without just a blanket price cut, assuming that's not possible? What kind of bundled deals would you like to see? Maybe formation box sets. So, for example, if you are Farsight Enclaves, you could pay to have a box that was just a Riptide, a Broadside, Farsight, a Commander, and 4 Crisis. You could just buy the 8. What if you could do that? Let me know if that would be a nice bundle idea that you would run with, also in the comments. For now, though, time to go. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all again. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.